Okay, I have Guy Rowland with me again today. This is the creator and producer of Lucy Letby Films YouTube channel, who's made all the Botched documentaries. This is a continuation of the first part of our discussion that came out a few days ago. So, firstly, let me just say hello to Guy and thank you for joining us again.
Hello again.
Good to have you back, although we haven't actually left or been anywhere. Um, So yeah, let me just explain a few things about the first part. So we discussed Guy's film, we discussed his background, we discussed some stuff about television, we discussed the Netflix documentary, and we finished by discussing the importance of narrative in both the way that Lucy was portrayed and in the prosecution case and in the court case and ultimately in the conviction of Lucy Letby. So we're going to begin this second part by discussing the emotional resonance of the prosecution case and the use of emotion in court. Before I ask this question and ask Guy to comment on it, I just want to say, give a little bit of detail with regard to this. So, there are many elements that contributed to the emotional aspect of the prosecution case, and I tried to deal with all of them in my book. But one of the most important, I think, is utilizing the parents of the infants as eyewitnesses, which when I actually wrote the chapter on eyewitness accounts, I was aware that it has to be done relatively delicately because the parents have been through a very traumatic ordeal, and any criticism of the parents is obviously untenable, essentially. But at the same time, I did want to get across the fact that the fact remains none of them have seen Lucy do anything wrong, and some of the recollections and some of the things that were put into the court case as evidence were not only not correct, but they're fundamentally misleading when they were correct. And then at the end of it, none of them has seen Lucy do anything wrong. That's agreed evidence. No one contests that. So, in my view, that whole thing is just evidentially worthless, and it is used solely to emotionally influence the jury. And another aspect of that we're going to discuss later is this performance of the police interviews. Um, the only reason that can have been done, as opposed to just showing the original interviews, was to have an emotional resonance. So I just wanted to, before I ask that question, I just wanted to explain these things and just reflect on them a little bit myself. But I'm now going to ask Guy just to discuss the emotional resonance of the prosecution case and how emotion was used in court and his view on that.
Yeah, thanks. It's part of the narrative again, isn't it? I think emotion. In part one, in our discussion, you were saying how you wanted to keep your emotion out of your book and look at it very factually. I know David Davis has said similar things, hasn't he? He's not up for the emotion. It's just about the facts, and that's absolutely right. When it comes to the kind of the mechanics of what was said and done and what the allegations are, you have to do that. But at the same time, emotion is this incredibly powerful tool, which is not even I think I hinted before. It's in the right context. It's important. If you're watching a film, if you're watching and you're kind of 20 minutes in and you find yourself thinking, I don't care about any of these people or what's happening. You'll probably switch off and go to bed. That you're not emotionally involved. That on some level, normally, if you're interested in a story, you're emotionally involved. Now, in whatever way, you might be scared, you might be, you might be delighted, you might. It obviously will depend. Now, when it comes to the court case, you've got this incredible emotion that you've just talked about, because harming babies is about the worst thing any of us can deliberately doing that is the worst thing you can imagine. And when you've got so with the parents of the babies, and they that they gave their own testimony in court. And for me, sometimes I can, in terms of establishing who was where, and obviously they're witnesses and they're important, so I understand why you might have to do that. But in general, if you're hearing them talk about their incredibly harrowing experiences, and they're there, and sat over there is this woman who is not showing any emotion, and you are being told is responsible for all of it. You can't help it. You can't help. It's called the agency detection bias, I think. That's that thing is that there has to be, when you're hearing Judith Moritz says in Botched, they were harrowing stories and week after week after week, and she's just sat there while it's all swirling around her. And it's like that mental image she's created is a powerful one. And I can, it's, you have to be made of stone not to be affected. I've read some of those parents' testimonies, and they are just, it's just awful. It's just absolutely awful. It's an entirely different matter as to what was behind that, what was going on, and that's what. So you have to separate that. But I think what the point you've made, you have to be extremely careful how you do that in courts, because that is potentially a bias factor. Emotion itself is a bias factor, and there's another layer to it as well, which I think is really important, because given how powerful that is, it starts to materially affect how you can conduct your case, because we know, and you had Wayne Squire on as a guest a while ago, which I thoroughly recommend people listen to, or listen to some of her other talks. She's really, really great. And her story, very, very briefly, is to do with shaken baby syndrome. She used to testify for the prosecution. She found, when she looked into it, there wasn't the evidence for it. She started testifying for the defense, and her career was ruined. The career was absolutely ruined by that. And essentially, one of the things that's thrown at people in defense, you're defending baby killers. Oh, you're the one who wants to defend a baby killer. And that's like, so people don't want to do it. I mean, there's other issues in equality of arms and funding and all those things. There's a lot of factors. But emotionally, people do not need that grief. They don't want to be the one person standing up and saying, but maybe, because you're this wall of emotion that you're facing is really, really hard. And so it's another case where we see here where the elements of the case start dictating the outcome. Just because it's so emotional, that means you're not going to get people in there. So it's a huge part of the story here.
Yeah, absolutely. So something I want to add that is really important is that we are more convinced by emotion than by facts.
Right.
There's been all kinds of studies. It's proven beyond any doubt that a particularly emotionally resonant narrative, will be far more convincing than a lot of facts. And that is a legitimate criticism of what I did. I could have brought more emotion into it, but I didn't want to convince people with emotion. I wanted to convince people with legitimate arguments
Yeah.
on this occasion. As you rightly said, it can be legitimate to use emotion, but I think in a case such as this, where it's so emotional to begin with, it's not. Now, of course, the prosecution knows we need to win. That's our job. We need to use every tool in the toolbox, and this is one of our biggest tools, and that's why it was utilized so extensively in my estimation. And another example of that I already mentioned, but we're going to go on to discuss, was something that Guy mentioned in Botched Part 3, not using police interview footage that is readily available, and they could have just shown it on the screen, but using actors, and not only using actors, but getting Daniel Stonier to not play herself and to get someone else to play her, who was male, who was obviously Nick Johnson. So that to me seems deeply inappropriate. What do you think about it?
Yeah, well, it is absolutely bizarre. There's no logical reason for it. I understand it's not unprecedented. It's quite common, I believe, to do this. And there is no possible argument for why that's a good idea. It's as Ollie Buxton, the jolly contrarian blogger, said in the film, with the best will in the world, you are going to skew that interpretation. And obviously, it's theatre, but I'm not literally saying they go and learn their lines and they build a set and all that. It's obviously not that. They're reading it from the thing, and they're probably, I don't know how much they put into that part. But the point is, that when we're talking about the parents here, that woman, Danielle Stonier, she was the liaison officer. She was the family liaison officer. I don't know who first would have gone to them, but someone would have first gone to them and sat down and said, we need to have a conversation about what happened to your baby 2-3 years ago, when they've been asking questions, they don't know what happened, and then they say, we think it was a nurse, Lucy Letby, and how shocking that would have been.
Mm.
And it's like that relationship would have built up over years in terms of that thing. And they wouldn't, there is no way that they would have done that had they not themselves said to them, look, we're not doing this casually. We've done our homework. Essentially, we think, we've got to, this is, they would have been saying a version of that. And to then have to watch that woman that you have built this rapport and trust in, that is so vital and so important, saying the words of the person who may have killed your baby, I'm just staggered that was allowed. It's just breathtaking, and it's completely unnecessary. It's unnecessary, isn't it? It's just wrong.
Unfair.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you've got the footage right there. Just press play. Like Netflix mocked up in the documentary. That was a mock-up. That never happened. What we saw there, they never saw that footage. Absolutely bizarre. And just generally on the role of emotion, I do. I'll stand. I want to stand up because as I'm telling stories, you have to be emotionally involved in the stories, and so I am aware. All those things that I do, those techniques I'm doing, where you contrast Judith saying things with what Ben Myers said, those kind of contrast, that has an emotional effect, and I'm aware of that. And it's like, I can just imagine people saying, oh, you're no better, you're just using emotion, I'm using emotion in my stories. And I would say, well, yes, I am. But the reason I'm doing that is because it was so nakedly used originally to form that argument. You have to strip that away and see what actually might be going. If I'm telling the story, that involves characters, that involves people, and the emotions are sky high here. They're absolutely sky high. So I can't really tell the story without emotion, I think. And I would say, but that's what I do as a storyteller versus what you're doing as someone writing a non-fiction book. So I think it's quite right in your case that yours is a factual, still kind of page turning in its way, because it's so extraordinary what's being discussed. But yeah, there's a time and a place for where you use it, and you have to be responsible in how you're using it, and you're not being deceptive. That's the key thing. If I'm representing something, I think genuinely that's where the evidence is showing that contrast is a valid contrast to make. So yeah, that's just broadly on the idea of emotion.
Yeah, I think the more emotional book from me will come in the future, probably.
Right.
But this one just needed to be as dispassionate as possible.
Yeah.
I just want to add something to this whole thing of the police interviews being reenacted. Another important thing to note, and no one can possibly deny this, they can't possibly deny this, is that even if they did it with the best will in the world, with an absolute commitment to accuracy, I don't believe for 1 second they did that. I think they absolutely would have done it in a performative way that was intended to convince the jury that Lucy Letby was guilty. After all, it's being done by the prosecuting barrister. But even if they did do it with the best will in the world, they can't possibly remember how Lucy Letby said things because it's 23 hours of interviews. You'd have to have one of the world's greatest memories to even have a chance. And I don't think Danielle Stoney's got one of the world's greatest memories from what I've seen of her. So it's by definition inaccurate immediately, just purely because of the constraints of human memory.
And this, just to emphasize that, how important that is, how inflection is vital. If you take the simplest answer, if you write down the words, how are you, answer okay, right? How are you going to say okay? Right, so let's do our own role playing. Chris, you ask me how I am.
How are you? How are you?
Okay. Now ask me again.
How are you, Guy?
Okay.
Yes.
See
So
the
very,
point?
very different, of course.
It means two completely different things, and you're just working off transcript. So there is so much other information in there that you are picking up, that you are just tossing all that away, and you are grafting new information on the top with however they. Yeah. So yes, it's not just unnecessary, it's bang on wrong, as I
Yeah,
heard a kid say once. It's one of my favorite phrases, but yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to. I don't think there is any counter argument to that even. Um,
There
I,
must be
I,
some legal history, there must be some arcane.
well, I think the thing is that all this court system dates back so long. They didn't
Yeah.
have TV when
No,
they, so so
no,
you're
I
just
know.
allowed to do it, and they've never stopped anyone from doing it.
Yeah.
There should be a statute or a law or however it's described. I don't know the technical term that says if you have footage of something, you have to show that footage. You
Mm.
can't reenact something that exists in the real world because there's no justification for it, and you introduce all this bias even if you weren't trying to, but you are trying to introduce bias.
And they,
So it's
was
just
it you, was it you who did this? There was this bizarre thing of one of the baby's cases where they reenacted a photo of how the baby was situated in a room. You know this one? That that the baby was in a darkened room and there was light coming in, and the allegation was that Lucy was at the door and couldn't see how the baby was, and Lucy had said the baby was pale. That was the allegation. And so they mocked up in another nursery, as I understand it, uh, what they thought the lighting conditions were, and it had admitted that into evidence. It got into evidence, and the defence agreed to it. I mean,
yeah.
what?
This sounds like something Marion's done. I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
Marion will have done this.
I think it is. I think it is. Yeah, yeah. Um, just just mind-boggling that that would be not only evidence, it's not evidence at all, and agreed evidence. It's not another one of those things that you just go, what on earth
Yeah,
is this? It's and yet they get the door swipe data back to front. So they're so busy mocking up photo shoots and reenacting videos, but they're not actually looking at what data they've got. It's just unbelievable.
yeah, it is incredible. Um, while we're on the topic, what do you think about these police leaks and Dr. Jayaram and his willingness to completely change his story again? What's your reflection on that?
Oh, you the yeah, specifically Baby K. You're
Yeah, this obviously has been these for people. I mean, most people will know, but in the recent BBC Radio 4 program documentary, it's been revealed that when they realize they're having a conversation, Jay Ram with Darren Riley's one of the people and some other police officer I hadn't heard of who's not in the film, Hummingbird film, and they tell Dr. Jayaram, "Whoops, we reversed all the data that we all know about now," and they say to him, "Oh, we can't change the data, but we can just change our interpretation of it." And he basically says, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Let's do this. I could say that. I could say that. You know,
mm.
what do you think of all that?"
Well, I think you can jump to a slightly over dramatic conclusion where they would sort of, witness coaching and all of that. I think what we're seeing there is what we kind of already know, that they're the golden thread and they're kind of essentially part of the investigation. When you read that whole transcript, it's like they're just trying to figure it out together. Oh, all right, it's not that then. So what do you think if you don't, and they will correct him when Ravi's getting it wrong, saying, no, 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 that's not what it looks like here. But it's kind of, they never stood back and said, but wait a minute, that means that what he said in the original trial about being dead certain that I walked in there at 3:50, that actually was wrong. Maybe his recollection of this isn't as razor sharp as we think. Maybe we need to back off. Or no, they didn't do that. They said, right, let's kludge this. Let's see if we can take the same basic idea and forget about the fact that a nurse has just walked through it, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just think we're seeing the golden thread is what I think, which is how they described it themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, fair. So let's. I know that you think there's a cultural change at the Council of Chester. So
Yeah.
Susan Gilby comes in,
Yeah.
replacing the previous incumbent. Remind me, what's her position? Is she just CEO? Is that
She was
her?
here. She came in, I believe, as the deputy in, I believe, August 2018, which is the month after Lucy was first arrested. And within 6 weeks, I think, something like that, she became the CEO. I can't go into it in too much depth because there's a whole load of legal stuff wrapped up in her, and she had her own um, grievance, which she won, and everything. But well, I think it's not just my understanding. I think if you go and look at what happened, the hospital had been quite supportive of Lucy and had did right by her, and the management were trying to do right by her. I believe she was still being financially, she was still on the books. She got arrested. And then Susan Gilby came in. She had the conversation with Stephen Breary, and guess what? Within 10 minutes, she believed him. Where have we seen this before? Here comes the faith center of this whole investigation yet again. And she was horrified, she said, when she heard that he hadn't been believed before. And it's like, it's not a case of they didn't believe him, they were just asked for evidence. And so then everything changed. And I think that whole support structure and the people who supported her, I believe is what happened, is that she saw the court case coming, she saw all that, and she had to act and sort of make sure they were seen to be whiter than white. And this touches on a really big kind of subject, which is fear, which is the emotion and everything else turns into fear about how that might affect you. It's like when it comes to the focus turns onto you. What was your role? When did you know? When did you say anything? All based on stuff that is all over the place. And I think when it comes to fear, I think even people who follow the case quite a lot, they don't understand the depth of it. They don't understand. In Thirlwall, that eventually they got the statements from all the nurses, and none of them had any concerns, right? That is correct, right? None of them thought
absolutely, absolutely true.
Isn't it odd that not a single one has broken cover and said anything? None of them. And one or two explicitly said in their statements that they thought Lucy was innocent and the whole thing.
There's three, really.
Three, right, okay.
Yeah.
And the others, they weren't asked that question pretty much. They just refused to and said, no, I think this. And so, but even those people, they still haven't gone public. Why on earth wouldn't they, given the importance? And fear, I think, is the one word answer. That it's terrifying. They're still arresting people with Operation Duet and all that connected to it. There are, I'm going to tell a very anonymized story very, very briefly about someone I spoke to who I met in person. And this, I won't say it's male or female or what the role was, but they worked at the hospital and they knew Lucy to some extent, at least. That they said something that will never leave me. I had a conversation with someone who worked at the Countess of Chester. I won't say what their role was, male or female, anything like that. And they were telling me what it was like to work there and the fear that they were under. And they said that if I had a heart attack right now and fell on the floor and the ambulance screeched up to take me to the Countess of Chester, I would rather die where I am than ever go back into that building. And it wasn't hyperbole. They meant it. They meant it. Absolutely extraordinary. And that will never leave me, that story, because I now have a better understanding why people aren't speaking up. I don't know the details of exactly what everyone's afraid of. There was another story that I can't tell that involves someone who knew Lucy, that if that was ever out publicly, it's so shocking. It's so deeply shocking. But the important thing is it's made people, it's not just afraid, they are terrified. People are absolutely terrified. But all the things we're talking about, and we talk about the nonsense of Dowie Evans, and it's almost comic and that, it's not remotely comic for any of these people. The ripple effects, obviously Lucy's parents, the parents of the babies, but dozens, probably hundreds of other people whose lives have been just turned upside down by what has happened, who still can't speak. And that all comes from fear of the power of the state, that the power they have. They've seen what they've done to Lucy, which, as far as we can tell, pretty much everyone who worked there, apart from the doctors, thinks that she was blameless. She was absolutely blameless. And look what's happened. And so fear is a really, really important part of this case. And the silencing that's happened, like we said already, that in court, you only really hear one side because everyone else is too terrified to speak up or is being encouraged not to. I mean, that was reported in the Telegraph, wasn't it? That nurses were told
Yeah.
if they speak up, they will be in danger of losing their jobs, the livelihoods. So, and we know the unions weren't any good for Lucy either, so they're not going to get back up there either, probably. So yeah, that's a really important part, I think, of the effect that emotion and narrative has on the case.
Yeah. I don't think I can add anything to that really. I mean, I think it speaks for itself. Um, so we've discussed narrative a lot already. We discussed it in the previous parts. And one kind of platform or one venue in which narrative is prominent is theatre. So I know you have a view about courtrooms being theatrical. I mean, I think anyone can see that this is the case, but can you expand on that and why this is important?
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, you've got wigs, you've got costumes, so you've got all the trappings right there. But it's kind of bigger than that. It's about the fact that you've closed the walls and you have, in the last Botched film, that they didn't allow the RCPCH report, that they didn't allow the obstetric reports, they didn't allow them to interrogate why particular events were causing others. And so essentially you fill it away, all the other pieces of information that will enable you to tell your story, essentially. And so you've only got this very carefully controlled, Ben Myers, how many hands did he have tied behind his back? It was extraordinary. So you've got complete information control, and it bears no relation to reality. And here's a story, a first-hand story that to perhaps illustrate this is that December 2024, that I was in the room while there was a sort of a secret meeting with people involved in the defence, and someone invited me there, and I just couldn't quite believe I was there. Normally, if there's meetings, we're talking about cameras and equipment and trucks and things like that. We're not talking about a woman in jail. And everyone was smarter than me. And I was just looking around the room going, what on earth am I doing here? But one of the most powerful things that came out of that for me was that there were a number of people this applied to, but one doctor in particular who was still practicing. He was almost shaking with rage at trying to describe how his profession had been debased in court, how what was being spoken about bore no relation to reality whatsoever. And the others were all of one mind and one voice. That it was the things that were being talked about were ludicrous, and given the stakes, how horrendous that was. And I just remember his face. I just remember his face about how he got up, he stood up, and he said his piece so eloquently. But it was that just shows just how contrived, how artificial this courtroom is, how it's crucible, this theatre that we have with this tightly controlled narrative, and how dangerous that is. And it is, you've got to, you have to have a long discussion of how you make that better. But I think the way reporting restrictions and the closed nature of our justice system only makes that worse. I think there are ways to mitigate against that, to stop this being quite as absurd as it was in that case, that you can invent methods of murder that don't even exist and somehow get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, the first part, it is the legal response to that, saying that, oh, it's absolutely fine, because it's happened in the courtroom. So we can ignore reality, we can ignore science, we can ignore medical matters. It's happened in the courtroom, so therefore it's now correct. And what exists in actual reality doesn't matter now. And I know you like this point, so let me raise this point as well. It's the ludicrous pedestalization of the jury, where the crazy, because I know I will still, and I've obviously had people comment on this channel. I've had people send comments to me, although no one ever emails me, but and they'll say, "Oh, they're the jury. What about the jury? The jury, the jury, the jury." Let's just imagine I was in the jury. By some twist of fate, I was in the jury. As I mentioned in Waterstones, when I did my thing there. For starters, I would not be sitting there thinking, "Where's the obstetric and maternity information in this trial?" Because I haven't got a clue at that point. So if I was in the jury, I don't know what I would have done. I have my suspicions about what I would have done, but I would then be put on a pedestal as being part of the jury. It's like, oh, are you saying the juror doesn't, the juror saw the whole trial, the juror this, the juror that. But ironically, because I'm not part of the jury, I've been able to research this in great depth, and now I know way, way, way more than I would have done if I was in the jury. But but now people are just saying to me, or will say to me, I mean, a small percentage, oh, you weren't in court, so you don't know. You don't know anything. Whereas ironically, if I'd actually been in court, I would have been worse off. I would know less.
Yeah.
I know more because I wasn't in the jury. But if I had been in the jury, they'd have put me on a pedestal. And then as soon as I'd ceased to be in the jury, I'd then become I just find that fascinating. That whole thing is just fascinating to me because they are just 12 random people, and then they're in the jury, and it's like, oh, no, it's the jury, no, it's the jury. And then they go away and go back to their lives, and they go back to being taxi drivers or, unemployed people or accountants or retired or whatever it might be.
Mm.
And they're no longer of any relevance at all. Certainly not of no expertise. Like you wouldn't go to them now and say, oh, what do you think about the delay in antibiotics for child D? What do you think about antiphospholipid syndrome? What do you think about the absence of obstetric notes? What do you think about the subcapsular hematoma? You could ask them, but you wouldn't. I wouldn't get them on as a guest and ask them because they're not doctors, they're not medics, they're not nurses, they're not worked in a hospital.
No.
And that's the
Well,
thing. That's the thing that boggles my mind is that the Court of Appeal is now effectively saying it doesn't matter that this is scientifically wrong. It doesn't matter that this is medically wrong because the jury has decided that it's not. That's literally what they're saying.
and that applies to literally every detail. If something was said in court about something and it was one of 8 trillion words that was said, then that's it. It's said there, it's dismissed. You can't, the jury have rejected it in there. Yeah, it's ludicrous. And I don't know if you've seen it, but that first series of the Channel 4 murder.
I haven't been able to watch it yet because it's too depressing, but I might watch it at some point.
You know the headline. The
Yeah.
headline of it, where they had quietly, they reenacted a trial in front of two real juries. One didn't know the other one existed, and you saw the two jury rooms, and it was the most brilliant social experiment I've ever seen. And essentially, there was one very powerful, persuasive character in one room that gave one outcome for one jury and a different outcome for the other jury. And it's like, that's the reality. We can never, those jurors can never talk about what they've seen. They can never talk about what they've discussed. We've got no idea. And all we can know is that it took them like nearly a calendar month to come up with the first verdicts when they were presented with the certainty that someone had poisoned it with insulin. As far as they were concerned, it still took a month. And I think I commend them. I think that they, were all there, say taxi drivers and all of that, but they obviously they must have been desperate for it to end. But they stayed there for all that time, and in the end came up with the verdicts they did, which was the best they could have done in their situations. And I would love to, if any juror ever watches this video or anything, I would like them to know no one blames you. It wasn't, you did the best that you could in your situation. That, and it's no disrespect to say it should have been more qualified people and all that. It's equally true. So it's not their fault. It's not their fault. Yeah.
I think I should say as well, if any juror ever watches this, please send me an email. Um, you know, we
They would.
can we can we can connect with those people. It's Lucy_Letby_analysis at mail.com. Because you have protections as a juror. There's certain things you're not able to say publicly, but for example, in the Colin Norris case, their foreman of the jury and another juror both spoke out. That hasn't done him a great deal of good yet, but I think he received a very poor defense. But it's not. It's kind of a myth that you can't speak if you've been on a jury. That's not actually true. So
You can't say what was discussed. That's the
no,
deal, isn't it? You can
no.
say what you think, but you can't say what's discussed. Something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, and also I think if new information, like they could talk about anything new that wasn't in the trial,
Yeah.
anything. You could say, as is self-evident, we should have been told this. But
Mm.
now in the Lucy Letby case, that gives you a lot of,
Yeah.
of potential to
Yeah.
talk. So in the unlikely event that Jura does watch this, please do get in touch. Or get in touch with someone anyway, if you feel able to speak out about this, because you weren't given firstly you weren't given a correct impression of what happened, and secondly, you weren't told a lot of important information,
Mm.
and you have a right to talk about that publicly, and it's a matter of national importance in my view. So I just will mention that briefly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Amen.
Sorry, go on.
No, no, go on. Where?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I was just going to move on to another question. Um, so let's talk about. We're still on the topic of the narrative.
Mhm.
So what we see in this court case, and we've seen this very explicitly from the police interviews, and then what happens in court, because they just passed the questions that they asked Lucy straight into the court case, regardless of her answers, usually. So can we discuss that? Just the narrative being passed straight from the investigation straight into court.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was. We touched on quite a lot of it now. I think that essentially, to me, the biggest picture is that the two narratives here is evil serial killer on the loose on the ward, malfunctioning NHS unit, and only one of those stories could be told. So that's a massive deal. That's how the narrative gets controlled. Right, we're going to eliminate a very limited way in which you can't really say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the reality, that this was just an underfunded NHS. You can't really do that. He couldn't do that. So the big picture is struck out. Then, like the obstetric notes, is a massive deal, so that's being struck out. But all of these things you can do to sort of counter the story, and just the unevidenced allegations with the cherry-picked information is pretty much all you're left with. And this is another thing, just back to juries. I don't think jurors generally like lawyers,
Mm,
overall you can't blame them. And
mm,
you look at what Ben Marsden, he said so many brilliant things, so many things we want him to say, but he used an awful lot of words, and
mm,
he was very clever. And I think that sometimes plays against jurors' instincts.
mm,
They just, when they've got the old retired paediatrician there who's doing his best, God bless him, and these judges honest gov, and you've got someone trying to needle him, of course he would. He's paid to kind of defend his client. That I think it's another thing that can sort of work against you, because the defence as a whole didn't do enough groundwork in terms of the absolute building blocks, the insulin evidence, and all that other stuff that the no expert witnesses. I mean, goodness me. So again, you've just got half a picture. The Guardian journalist Josh Halliday, who said that he was gobsmacked. He said he was just so stunned when there were no expert witnesses called after all of that. And there's structural reasons why, and I think you can, Ollie talked about that in the film. But as far as you as the jury are concerned, you just can't help but think, oh, they couldn't get anyone, could they? She must be guilty. So it was another thing, another sort of a force in that case that really skewed it all off to one side. It's
mm.
my feeling.
Absolutely.
So it just
Oh, well, I
what
think
you
that,
said, but yeah, investigation to court case, it just goes from one to the other, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, 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 absolutely. I think that can't really be denied because you've seen all the prosecution case, and then I don't know what the exact timeframes were, but it must have been like, okay, we call the estates manager, right? That's it. We don't have any more witnesses. I
It
mean,
was. It was all done in an afternoon. Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean that must have been. It's not surprising that Josh's reaction was one of,
Ah,
you know, disbelief.
yeah.
How else would you respond?
I think everyone was the same because it was not known, obviously, but it
Yeah,
was you. And I kind of wanted to do that in the film. Kind of, right, here we go. Here come a plumber. Okay, didn't expect a plumber, but all right, who's next? That's it. And you
yeah,
just, what? What do you
yeah,
mean that's it? It's just
yeah.
extraordinary, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. I mean, it would be extraordinary in any context, but given the number of people willing to speak out now and that have spoken out, uh, that just makes it 10 times worse. And I don't think it's unreasonable to criticize the defense for that aspect of the trial.
People, I
Um,
think, might just focus a bit too much on Ben Myers because he was the KC, but there was
yes,
the firm behind that were a sort of a high street local firm.
yeah,
I have to say, I can say this, it's my view,
yeah,
that when the scale of that case was apparent, they should not have taken that case. That high street solicitors. They should have said, in ethically, this is beyond what we can do. We do wills and conveyancing and petty theft and I don't know what. They should have said to them, look, we really recommend, because they could still have had Ben Myers, they were the same QC or KC as it was then, yeah. But to go to a really top defence firm of solicitors, but they ended up taking a lot of legal aid money, and they didn't appear to return an awful lot of calls of people who were wanting to help them, and they didn't do a lot of due diligence by the looks of things. And so it feels to me like the strategy was Ben Myers. He was a very good, very capable, very eloquent KC. He'll do it without doing the legwork. It's like, do you know, this is a good example, but the insulin cases, Ben Myers had a really great bit with the jury where he said that the whole thing of the pre-spiking this bag, it's crazy because the bag's in a fridge. She doesn't know which bag they're going to take, they're going to use. She must have been Nostradamus, he said, to have predicted that. And if you're the jury, you're thinking, well, all right, but someone predicted it because you've just conceded the insulin got there somehow. Effectively, I know there's a slightly dot I's and cross T's on what counts as poisoning, and insulin is added somehow. They agreed to that. Somehow that got there. And so for the jury, the big picture is, well, you haven't given us another explanation. You've just said it wasn't ergov. It doesn't sound very convincing. But they didn't do that. If they had done the legwork and got someone to more robustly challenge the fact that those tests are not to be used even in a forensic setting, I mean, at least say that. Unbelievable.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the role of journalists a little bit, but there are a number of public attendees of this trial. Obviously, this includes several journalists. Now, it certainly seems that they have bought into the narrative that was presented in court, including Judith Moritz, who featured prominently in this third part of Botched that we've discussed. So, can you discuss how journalists bought into this case, and also can you discuss the comments of Moritz on this ITV show Loose Women that you featured?
Yeah, I think I immediately think of war reporting. Do you remember? I think it was a big scandal in the Gulf War of '91. That's the first time we had what they called embedded reporters. That you would get this great footage, that you'd be right there on the front lines, and they would look after you and protect you. But journalistically, you are somewhat compromised at that point. It's very hard to be impartial when you are actually. It's one thing to be alongside the fighting, but when you are embedded, when they are giving you access to things and giving you exclusive interviews. And I think that was rightly seen as a very dubious kind of thing. And this is what our system is with court reporters. They are embedded. There was that press conference that happened before the trial even started. That was an invite-only event that we still don't know anything that happened on there. There was another press conference during the defence's summing up, invite-only event. And when it came to that panorama, a lot of that was taken, filmed at that press conference, I think. And there was other interviews of parents, I believe, were interviewed. Almost all of that would have been arranged. These are the exclusives you get if you stick with us, if you're in the inner circle of trust. And it just compromises you. I think actually Judith Moritz, we all know what she said in the end there, but there's one in the, I think it was in the part 2, where there was the Daily Mail podcast with Liz Hull and Caroline Cheetham. And Paul Hughes is banging on about how he thinks, with the notes that they found, she wanted them to be found. And you can hear one of them, I'm not sure which one, going, yeah, that's right. Go on, you tell them. And it's like, what on earth is that? What kind of journalism is this? They're all in this chummy little club that are all egging each other on. And it's like, is that what journalism is now? Is that the hard questions you're asking? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she wanted them to come. This absolute nonsense theory that he's plucked out of his ass, frankly. It's just ridiculous. And it's like, that's what happens. And we know, by the way, that the Cheshire Police paid the media factory who made that podcast money in the trial. Actually, some of it for training and some of it listed, itemized as publicity. So it's like that's going on during the trial, and he says those comments afterwards. And so That was true of Judith Moritz. It's true of pretty much all those people. And it's like you have to be. The other thing to remember about Judith, God bless her, is that she was just a Northwest reporter, a reporter.
Yeah.
If there's a building on fire, the job of the reporter is to stand in front of it with a microphone and say, behind me, a building is on fire. And that's what they do. If you're an investigative journalist, your job is to go, why did that building catch fire? Why did it take hold in that way? And do all that forensic stuff. And my understanding is that Judith is just a reporter. And so actually, I reserve even more criticism for her partner in crime, if you will, Jonathan Coffey, who's a producer and a director on those panoramas. And it's like, right, okay, you're the person that's coming up with that, the Liverpool stuff, all that stuff that's there that they had to re-edit. It's like, where is the rigor here? Where on earth has all that gone? And you're just standing around repeating the party line from the police. And it's that's really got to be looked at. That's got to be, it's the NHS, obviously, appeals, obviously, all this stuff. But it's like the relationship between prosecutions and media really needs looking at too, I think.
Absolutely. So you touched upon this in your previous answer, the this kind of conscious media strategy of Cheshire Police, which
Yeah.
even predated Hummingbird commencing. So
Right.
can you talk about that and the significance of this?
Yeah, it was on, I mean, I'm sure you know full well, that very, very first meeting on May the 5th, 2017, where you had the three managers from the hospital, I think it was, and the first conversation, and they ended that more or less going, doesn't sound like there's anything for us to do. But at the end, we do need a media strategy if this goes ahead. Even before they had started with the with the investigation, before they didn't think, they said, if we have one, though, we're going to need a media strategy. So that's, be under no illusion, media strategy, controlling the narrative is absolutely baked into investigations.
Mm.
And what do we know? We know that they paid the Daily Mail podcast. We know that they paid a PR company. We've all of that is all paid for by the taxpayer, essentially, the prosecution to get those things. And that's, oh, and there was one, as well as the police, you've also got the lawyers had their own PR company. One of the firm of solicitors got their own PR company, and they boasted, they won an award. They boasted that the ability that they had to help steer the conversation. Let's think about that. You're boasting about steering the conversation on a criminal trial, and crucially the public response to it. So all those pitchforks that were out for Lucy Letby and the headliners that you got, that was strategic. You were essentially being played, is the way I would see that. Now, I have to be careful. The PR company, I'm sure, believed that she was guilty and all of that. But again, you really need to think about this language and what they're doing, and it's very, very suspect, I think. And I should say, by contrast, because this keeps coming up, there is Maltin PR that Mark MacDonald, Lucy Letby's barrister, does some stuff through them. They have done some other stuff on the case. They work pro bono. Everything they do on the case is completely free. So what's their motivation? This kind of weird conspiracy theories that some people say that there is some overarching thing. Who? Why? What? No one's getting anything out of it. It's just their reputations are going to be trashed if they stick their head over the parapet, and a PR company are not even getting paid. It's like, because how about this? Because they think maybe an injustice has been done, and maybe that's the motivation in their case. Anyway, it's just a contrast that there was plenty of money poured into prosecution, publicity, and shaping that narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree entirely. So another important aspect of this, and I think this is, I think you really brought this across very well in your film, is that the nature of this issue means that as there's more media coverage, it inherently, almost without exception, focuses on the controversy. And then that ratchets up the emotion of the case further still. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that occurs. It's like something out of a science fiction film where there were so many opportunities to stop something, but it just carries on this path that was so avoidable. But all these unintended things just make it worse and worse and worse.
These are kind of biases and systemic biases, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I think it's all right to say this. I'm not sure if I heard Mark MacDonald explained this, that he said that if he's there for the defense in court and there's journalists around, they always beforehand, they're always crowding around the prosecution table. I hope I'm not talking out of line here. And they're never interested in defense. And the moment the guilty verdict has happened, boom, they're off and they're doing their stories and they've got their interviews and that. If the defendant is found not guilty, they just all go away. No one at any point talks to the defense. It's another one of these biases that's there, that bakes into the system, because someone not doing something is not a story. It's just boring. It's ridiculous. And I think as well, I do think true crime and that genre is kind of feeding that machine. It's a tail wagging dog that we want that. And it is just, I think, the modern day version of people turning up to public hangings. But yeah, yet another systemic factor that's pushing us in that direction.
I think, I mean, I often reminded, I know that I've probably mentioned this to you, it does remind me of the scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian, where the guy said Jehovah and they've got him chained up and they're all going to stone him to death. And it just reminds me of that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Which is obviously done very comically.
Yeah.
But the heart of that is a very dark aspect of that society, that they used to stone people to death, which is pretty brutal. Sentencing someone to death is obviously pretty brutal anyway, but actually getting people to throw stones until they've been physically annihilated by it is pretty dark. And then the fact that this wasn't done privately, it was done publicly.
I know.
So they've made something very amusing out of something awful, obviously. But it does very much remind me of that. I should just say as well that in relation to Mark McDonald, those comments were at a public event. They weren't in a private meeting.
Oh, were they? Great, good.
Just to clarify that. So let's talk about the contrasting motivations between those supporting the prosecution narrative and those that seek to challenge it. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Okay, so again, we've touched on what's facing someone who stands up for the defense here. Public, they've got their reputations on the line. And what I see again and again is, like I said in that meeting, you've got people who are just, number one, they're horrified at what's been done to their profession, whatever that is, whether they're statisticians or engineers or obstetricians, whatever it is. They are all horrified by that, and that offends them professionally. And then you've got the, oh, by the way, that probably means there's a completely innocent woman who's been told she's going to die in jail. So those are the kind of motivations that I see everywhere with the defense. And I think there's a real rigor. There's a commitment to science, evidence, reason. Not everyone agrees, and they will have disagreements with different groups in the defense. And then sometimes it winds me up. But I think underneath it there is good, because they know they have to be right. It's like science is the yardstick here. Reason is the yardstick. You don't do it by emotion. You don't do it by saying a jury convicted, blah, 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 blah. And so that's what's going on with all the defense. And it's a misshapen mess at times, but it's a lot of incredibly, decent, genuine people, none of whom are getting paid. None of those experts are getting paid. The lawyers aren't getting paid. The PR company's not getting paid. Only for free. Versus the prosecution. And it's like, I really do want to be kind, because I think a lot of people and when I say prosecution, I also mean those who support the prosecution now, that they feel justice has been done. And this undermines that process. And so I think for a lot of them, they are driven by good motives. It's like, if Lucy really did all those crimes, then she's where she should be and all that.
But let me play devil's advocate.
Let me play devil's
advocate at this point, the guy. So you say they're motivated by justice being done. So isn't the appeal process and so forth, isn't that part of the justice system?
Well, you've spotted the flaw, haven't you? There. Exactly. It is. And I think what we're actually seeing an echo of something that's gone all the way through the trial. It's faith. They've got faith in the justice system. They don't want it tested. They don't want people to ask difficult questions. You just have to believe. Just like they believed, right? The doctors believed, and the police believed, and Susan Gilby believed, and now the public believe. And it's like, but At any point, did the evidence point in that direction? No. And so you are absolutely correct. I think the instinct is fine, and I think that's honourable. And particularly when it comes to the parents, I totally understand that. And none of us want the parents upset. I certainly don't, and it gives me my sleepless nights as the thought that they might be upset over anything that I do. And I have no beef with any of them and anything they say I do. I think my greatest anger, we started talking about anger, is the casual nature to which the police started that investigation and went to the parents, not having done a thorough investigation, not having really looked and done, this is very serious stuff. We're not going to stir all this up. And there, these ripple effects and the lives that have been ruined, the casual nature of that is just, to me, it's just the worst thing. And so just always use rigor at all points, and that includes in the appeal system. Do it rigorously, do it properly, and welcome it, because the justice system is going to get it wrong. We know it's got it wrong. It's what's going to happen.
Human beings, ultimately. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
of course
yeah,
there are going to be mistakes. Of course there
yeah,
are. And I suppose we should just say briefly that we can't ask for a utopia. We can't ask for a system that never makes mistakes. That's not possible. What we can do is improve upon what we're doing. I don't know why this example just came to mind, but when Ayrton Senna died, um, even though there's a documentary made about Senna, and some aspects of that documentary are a little bit misleading, in my opinion. But generally, it's a good documentary, and it shows rightly that there was genuine concern about safety at that time in Formula One, and that is reflected by a very small footnote in this story, which is kind of tragic that it's just a footnote. But someone else died the day before Senna died at the same Grand Prix. It was Roland Ratzenberger, I think I'm right in saying. So if you have two deaths at one Grand Prix in 2 days, it's not great. And I was that obviously prompted eventually. I don't know how quick this was. I'm not an expert on it, but they said, look, we need to make Formula One safer, and they have. And you don't have driver deaths anymore. I'm not saying it couldn't happen because you can always have that element of human error, but they've built everything fail safe into the system to say, right, it's still Formula One, they still go fast, but if they crash, they don't die. Whereas from 70s to the 90s, you couldn't say that, and people did die, and there were horrible incidents, and part of that's technology and things evolve, but also part of it is they quite purposefully decided this can't go on, this cannot go on any longer, and that's what needs to now happen in the criminal justice system.
Oh, 100%. I agree with every word. And it's, I think, another thing that Ollie Buxton had kind of said, that by design, it's going to get it wrong. It's like, it's reasonable
Yeah,
doubt. It's a balance of probabilities. It's all that stuff, which means that you're going to do this. And it's like, when we're facing prisons that are overcrowded and they're talking about releasing violent offenders, when there are probably thousands of innocent people in prison, this should be an absolute urgent priority. Find those innocent people. It's financially, it makes sense, and it's ethically, of course, it's indefensible to do anything otherwise. Why on earth are women terrified about their abusive partners coming out of prison early, and yet innocent people are still held back? It's just like, it makes no sense at all. And I think we're going to see a lot of push for this coming up now, for these kinds of changes, because it's indefensible the way the
yeah,
system is.
absolutely. So we talked a bit about the belief of the public. Now, there's been an incredible shift in public opinion. As a kind of barometer of that, when I went on the Daily Telegraph podcast, there were nearly 4,000 comments, and they were just almost entirely supportive. You really had to go into the dregs of the comment section to find anyone saying anything critical or saying, I think this is a safe conviction. And it's not a small sample size, it's quarter of a million views, I say 4,000 comments. And I think virtually anyone that's looked at this case now knows that this is an unsafe conviction and a wrongful conviction. So, can we discuss the significance of that and why this has occurred?
Mm. The short answer of why it's occurred is the prosecution lost control of the narrative. Finally, this is what we've been talking about all the way through, isn't it?
Hmm.
That they had reporting restrictions. They were briefly lifted. They went back in again for the retrial. Eventually, they ran out of road, and the Guardian articles published. The New Yorker got through. That was controversial. And so, and then very brave people started to speak up, but despite all that fear. And so, crucially, though, they were allowed to. They wouldn't have been allowed to before. And I think that's it. And I think what's happened in the space of time has been absolutely remarkable. I think you've said, and I agree, that I don't think there's been another case happen this fast, this much in terms of public awareness. I think it's soft, if I'm honest. I think that there's a general sense of something not quite right. Someone else should have a look at this. And I think it's like we haven't had our Toby Jones moment, I call it, the with the post office horizon. That anyone who was awake and paying attention knew what was going on there. It was not a secret. It was happening in government. It was being reported by every paper. And yet ITV put on their drama, I think it was the beginning of 2024. I think it was 25, I forget. It was January of one of those years. And it was like, it was a revelation to everybody. It was like the public were just incensed and outraged. And actually what that does is it shows the power of story. It shows the power of drama, that when you're using it for the right purpose, you're not using it to manipulate and to push forward an agenda, and you're just saying, let's look at how this thing affected ordinary people. People respond. You have an emotional response that I would say is right and good, that they were very good storytellers who did that justice. And it's like, and I have mixed feelings about this. I think the weird thing is that the narrative was of the serial killer, and that was a great story. The pretty young, attractive serial killer, that's a story. And they didn't have a story they could compete with. Well, we do actually now have a story, because this person is completely innocent and shouldn't be there. And that tugs at the heartstrings. And so in the weird natural balance of things is that this story has now suddenly come to the fore, and it's in its own way a completely compelling story. And by the way, it's true. What I would say. So I hope this is just the beginning. And I do want people to hear more and more about what the reality was, and to get angry, because public anger is what drives this if it's directed in the right place. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the final question I want to ask you is, we've talked about the system, we've talked about the problems. That's always one side of any issue of this nature. The other side is what needs to change in order to minimize the chances of repetition of this wrongful conviction. Now, please answer. It's a difficult question to answer succinctly, so please say as much as you need to.
Okay. Yeah, there's a few things, and we've touched on probably all of them, I don't know, at various points. The equivalent of the air crash investigation team, 19 nurses have got a campaign going on this. I think this is spot on. That we need to have a medical version, a hospital version of when there's the equivalent of what happened in Chester, that suddenly they've been coasting okay, and suddenly there's an increase in deaths. At that point, you don't call in the police. You call in, you pick up the bat phone and say, experts run in. And the experts run in of all these different disciplines, and they should be able to diagnose within weeks, a short number of weeks. They'll say your ventilation settings are wrong. They will say you need to increase your ward rounds. You need to watch that. You need to do infection control. Blah 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 blah. It's not one thing. Paul Hughes believes that there was just one thing, and if it wasn't one thing, it was Lucy, and that's just ludicrous bias. That they need to get forensic, and they need to do that. So that's number one. And I encourage everyone to find that petition and back 19 nurses. Because that would stop everything. Even if the police are rubbish, that's okay now, because it's not even getting to the police. We're stopping it there, unless they find deliberate evidence of harm, and then they can refer that on to the police. Expert witnesses. We have to reform the expert witness system. I think the Law Commission made recommendations in 2011 that they said we couldn't afford. And the madness of this, the madness of the short-term cost cutting. It's like, yeah, the air crash investigation equivalent is going to cost money, but it's going to save you in bills for bad maternal care massively. It's like preventative. Same thing with expert witnesses. If you get rid of the guns for hire, people who might have ulterior motives, and just saying what their paymasters want them to say, you have to get that system better. I think, and I'm not sure if Steve Watts would agree with me on this, but I think that complex investigations shouldn't be done by provincial police forces, local police forces. I think there should be national specialist units. It's beyond the capability of what they're designed to do. Equality of arms, that's another one. There has to be a real careful look at these systemic factors that the prosecution are always better funded than the defence. That has a material impact. That's important. And the final one that well, it's not the final one at all. I just jotted down a few, but I think the reform of the appeals process should be absolute total. The Law Commission are going to publish some things that are going to make it better, hopefully, next year, if they accept the recommendations. Forget it. The whole thing needs chucking in the bin. If you watch 19 Nurses videos, there's just devastating videos of people working with innocence projects. There are thousands of innocent people in prison that you can tell, that can demonstrate, you can prove are innocent, and they're told, oh, your defence screwed up at trial, so it's not admissible. Oh, you should have said that at trial, it's not admissible. That is a horror. That is an absolute horror that happens. So we've got to grip that. And it's like, I would say, Andy Burnham, let's start, getting to Andy Burnham and saying, with your prisons crisis, can we just get rid of the people who shouldn't be there at all? Is that not a priority? And there are ways to do that. There are ways to do that
Can I just mention,
thoroughly.
I
Yeah.
actually saw a very interesting discussion the other day by someone who does chess in prison. It's a very valuable program.
Yeah.
So we've got this figure of 2,000 to 10,000 people
Yeah.
and I think it's 10,000 at
Yeah.
least, but that's approximately 15% of the prison population based on what this guy was saying.
Right.
It's
Right.
approximately 85,000 people in prison.
Yeah.
So let that sink in.
And
That's a pretty high percentage.
even if you're callous and you don't care, I think I did the sums on 2000, which is the lowest end. That's $1 billion every decade that we're spending on keeping people where they should never be. That's insane. And if it's like 5 times that, gee, what's that? That's like $1 billion every couple of years. $500 million a year paid on doing that. That's the madness of it. And I believe it or not, I'm kind of quite optimistic. I think that if Andy Burnham has come in, never mind about politics and the allegiances, but he's someone who's saying we want to make things work better for people again. Well, let's see it, Andy. Let's see you do something on this. I think it would be really important. And there's probably other things to do with the justice system that need to be overhauled. It's got to be far better at being evidence-based and far less on legal process and procedure. The way that works, it's got to be evidence-led somehow. But yeah, I think both the Court of Appeal and the CCRC need urgent reform in how they do stuff. And I do think you're going to see, in the coming months, you'll probably see more on that, is my feeling. Because a lot of people say they watch my film and they're angry and they say, what do we do? What can we do? Should we just howl in Twitter and slag off people? And it's like, well, that's not really very constructive, is it? But I think it needs to be put forward to really specific proposals and political pressure put on. It's beyond what any of us can do on our own. The systems are so dysfunctional. They've got to change. And I want to help in any way I can. And I know that's true for you as well, Chris, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone feels that way sometimes. I should just say, I feel like I should say this from a personal perspective. So because I have a platform and I guess that I've become fairly prominent in this, I still have the same feeling of powerlessness as everyone else. You're up against some very powerful institutions here that have been around for a very long time. And yeah, I maybe have a bit of a voice now, but I'm a person of very little significance compared to, the head of public prosecution or the people at the head of the court system and so on and so forth. So I'm just one person and I'll do the best that I can. But we're all in the same boat, is all I'm saying, really. We just have to do whatever we can.
Yeah, exactly. And that's different for everybody. There's nearly always something you can do. And we shouldn't jump the gun or anything, but a number of us are talking about how to, get that information out best to people who really care and want to know what to do. Also, we're getting our heads together on that and trying to think for no money. No one's going to pay us to do it. So no one pays us to do anything. You're allowed to publish your books. You're an author. You are allowed to do that. But for
Thank
the
you.
rest of us, it's for the rest of us, it's just like we're just doing it what we can. We're not, we're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think I've asked all the questions now, so thanks to Guy for joining us. I want to say that firstly, I want to congratulate him for all his work, but also he's done so many things behind the scenes for no money and no recognition. If you see something that's been filmed, you can pretty much guarantee Guy filmed it, and you'll probably see stuff in the future, and you can pretty much guarantee that Guy will have filmed that for starters. And he's helped me quite a bit with quite a few different things, very selflessly. And I really appreciate that and appreciate everything that he's done. And yeah, finally, just thanks for joining us over these two episodes. And we'll definitely have you back on the channel in the future. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing because we all really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
That's my
Love
pleasure.
you.
Take care. See you again.
Bye.